The morning sky above New Terra turned black as 200 warships dropped out of hyperspace. Each ship was the size of a small city, covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. The massive fleet hung in the air like giant metal vultures, casting shadows across the peaceful colony below. Ambassador Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the human settlement. His reptilian features showed satisfaction as he watched the tiny buildings and green gardens spread out beneath him. This would be easy. It always was. Most species surrendered the moment they saw his fleet. The smart ones didn't even wait for the ultimatum. He had conquered 47 star systems for the hegemonic empire, 47 worlds that now bowed before imperial might. Each victory had followed the same pattern: arrival, demonstration of power, submission, integration. Clean and efficient, today would be no different. Down on New Terra's main landing pad, Kim Hana checked her watch and took another sip of her morning coffee. The colony administrator had received the standard imperial broadcast 30 minutes, ago announcing their arrival and demanding an immediate audience with local leadership. She had replied with coordinates for the landing pad and an offer of refreshments. The shuttle that descended from the flagship was sleek and intimidating, all sharp angles and dark metal. Steam hissed from its landing thrusters as it touched down with mechanical precision. Hana smoothed her simple blue dress and walked forward, her coffee mug still in hand. The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hydraulic whine, and Ambassador Veltar emerged. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scaled skin a deep emerald green that shifted to gold at the edges. Ceremonial armor covered his broad chest, etched with symbols of conquest and power. His golden eyes scanned the landing area, taking in the modest facilities and single human waiting to greet him. This was their leader, one small human female with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Where were the guards, the ceremonial processions, the desperate crowds begging for mercy? Hana bowed politely, the same respectful greeting she gave to visiting merchants or new colonists. "Welcome to New Terra, Ambassador. I'm Administrator Kim Hana. I hope your journey wasn't too tiring. Would you like some coffee or perhaps some tea before we begin our meeting?" Veltar's golden eyes narrowed to slits. In his experience, there were only 2 types of species when faced with imperial might: the wise ones who immediately groveled and begged for mercy, and the foolish ones who tried to appear brave, while terror leaked from every pore. This human showed neither response. She seemed genuinely pleased to see him, as if he were an expected guest rather than a harbinger of conquest. "I am Ambassador Veltar of the hegemonic empire," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had made countless leaders tremble. "I do not require refreshments. I require submission." He reached into his ceremonial sash and withdrew an ornate scroll case, carved from the bone of some extinct creature and inlaid with precious metals. The ultimatum inside had been crafted by the Empire's finest scribes, written in the ancient formal language that emphasized the gravity of imperial will. "I bring an ultimatum from His Supreme Excellence, Emperor Krathvak the Eternal," Veltar declared, his voice echoing across the landing pad. "Submit to imperial rule and accept integration into our glorious empire, or watch your world burn in cleansing fire." Hana accepted the scroll case with the same careful attention she might give to a delivery package. She opened it gently, mindful not to damage the beautiful craftsmanship, and unrolled the parchment inside. Her eyes moved across the elaborate text, taking in each formal phrase and ceremonial threat. Veltar watched her face, waiting for the moment when understanding would dawn, when the full weight of imperial power would settle on her shoulders like a crushing burden, when fear would replace that inexplicable calm. Instead, Hana's smile grew warmer. "Oh my, this is absolutely precious," she said, looking up at him with genuine delight. "Did you write this yourself? The calligraphy is simply beautiful. Look at these flourishes around the border work. And this formal phrasing is so elaborate and thoughtful." She rolled the scroll back up carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket like a cherished letter from a friend. "I'll definitely need to share this with our community council," she continued, pulling out a small tablet to check her schedule. "We meet every Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, right after our gardening committee finishes discussing the new flower beds. Would that work for your schedule?" I know you must be terribly busy with your diplomatic duties." Veltar stared at her, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had read an Imperial ultimatum demanding absolute surrender or total annihilation, and her response was to schedule a committee meeting and compliment his handwriting. This was not how conquest was supposed to work. Veltar's scaled crest flared bright red with anger and confusion. In 47 conquered worlds, no species had ever treated an Imperial ultimatum like a dinner invitation. No one had ever patted his armor and called his formal declaration of war precious. This human's reaction was completely outside his experience, and it made his blood boil. He turned sharply and activated his communication device, speaking in harsh, clipped tones to his fleet commander. "Admiral Kexran, target the large moon orbiting this planet. Full bombardment. Show these primitives what happens when they mock the Empire." The response came immediately. "Yes, Ambassador. Weapons charging now." Veltar looked back at Hana, expecting to finally see fear in her eyes as she realized what was about to happen. Instead, she was checking her tablet again, probably making notes about their meeting schedule. "You might want to step back a bit," he said coldly. "This will be quite bright." High above New Terra, the Imperial fleet turned their massive weapons toward the moon. 200 ships, each carrying enough firepower to level a continent, focused their energy cannons on a single target. The weapons had been designed to crack planets open like eggs, to split worlds down to their molten cores, and the bombardment began with a flash of light that briefly outshone the system's star. Beams of pure energy, each one thick as a skyscraper, lanced through space and struck the moon's surface. The satellite, which had orbited New Terra peacefully for millions of years, began to crack and buckle under the assault. The destruction was perfectly coordinated. The Imperial fleet fired in precise sequences, their weapons designed to create maximum visual impact. This wasn't just about destroying a moon. It was about sending a message. It was about showing any species foolish enough to resist the Empire exactly what their defiance would cost them. The moon split apart with geological precision. Two massive halves drifted slowly away from each other, trailing debris and glowing chunks of superheated rock. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a display of power that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. On New Terra's main observation deck, a crowd had gathered. Word of the light show had spread quickly through the colony's communication network, and people had hurried to get the best viewing spots. They brought folding chairs and small tables, picnic blankets and coolers full of cold drinks. Park Minho, a retired engineer with silver hair and kind eyes, set up his portable telescope and adjusted the viewing settings. He had worked on stellar observation projects for most of his career, and he appreciated good spectacle when he saw it. "Look at that precision," he said admiringly, watching the moon's two halves drift apart. "They split it right down the middle, clean as you please. That takes real skill with energy distribution." He started clapping, and soon the entire crowd joined in. The applause echoed across the observation deck as humans showed their appreciation for what they clearly saw as an impressive demonstration of technical ability. "Beautiful fireworks," Minho called out to anyone who would listen. "Very artistic approach. Most species just blast things randomly, but this shows real planning and coordination." Lee Sumin, the colony's security chief, made her way through the crowd toward where Veltar stood watching. She was a small, efficient woman in her 50s, with the calm confidence of someone who had spent years managing practical problems. She carried a datapad and wore the same pleasant expression she might have while reviewing maintenance schedules. "Ambassador Veltar," she said politely, approaching him with a slight bow. "That was quite an impressive light show. I hope you don't mind, but our sensors automatically recorded the energy signatures from your weapon systems. Fascinating technology." Veltar turned to stare at her, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. The moon was gone, completely destroyed, obliterated by weapons that could have turned their entire planet into floating debris. And this human was talking about energy signatures like she was reviewing a technical manual. "Your weapons show remarkably stable output," Sumin continued, scrolling through data on her pad. "Very consistent beam coherence across the entire fleet." That kind of coordination requires excellent engineering and training. Your weapons designers should be proud. She looked up at him with genuine professional interest. The power distribution algorithms must be quite sophisticated to achieve such uniform results across 200 ships. Would you mind if I asked, what generation of targeting systems you're using? Veltar's mouth opened and closed without sound. He had just demonstrated the most devastating display of military might in known space, and she was asking about targeting systems like they were. Discussing farming equipment, that was a demonstration of power, he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Sumin could respond, Administrator Hana appeared at his side, carrying a plate of what looked like small, golden-brown pastries. Her smile was as warm and welcoming as ever. "Oh yes, we certainly appreciate the effort you put into that display," she said cheerfully. "It must have taken considerable planning to coordinate all those ships so precisely. Would you like some cookies? Choi Junho made them fresh this morning. He's our baker, and he uses a wonderful recipe with local honey." She held out the plate toward Veltar, who stared down at the offered treats as if they were alien artifacts he couldn't comprehend. All around them, humans continued to watch the slowly drifting pieces of their former moon, pointing out interesting formations and discussing the technical aspects of the destruction with the same enthusiasm they might show for a particularly good concert or art exhibition. Veltar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of conquest, complete and utter confusion. Veltar's patience finally snapped completely. The polite applause for his moon-destroying demonstration had pushed him beyond all reasonable limits. His crest flared bright crimson as he turned to face Administrator Hana, his voice rising to a commanding roar that echoed across the observation. "Deck, enough of this mockery. I demand to speak with your real leaders. Where are your generals, your admirals, your military commanders?" His golden eyes blazed with frustration. "Bring me someone who understands the gravity of this situation." Hana looked genuinely puzzled by his outburst, tilting her head slightly as if trying to understand a confusing question. She glanced around at the crowd of humans still chatting pleasantly about the moon's destruction, then back at the furious ambassador. "Military leaders," she repeated slowly. "Oh, you mean the veterans? Well, most of them are probably in the community center right now. Thursday afternoon is game day, you see. They usually play cards or chess around this time." She pointed toward a modest, single-story building with large windows and a garden out front. Through the glass, Veltar could see elderly humans sitting around tables, some hunched over board games, others reading books or chatting quietly. "I'm afraid you might be misunderstanding what New Terra is, Ambassador," Hana continued gently. "This isn't a military outpost or government center. We're a retirement community. People come here when they want to enjoy their golden years in peace and quiet." Veltar stared at her in disbelief. "Retirement community? Oh yes, we have wonderful healthcare facilities, beautiful gardens and a very active social calendar. Most of our residents are former engineers, scientists, teachers, artists, some retired military personnel too, but they're all here to relax and enjoy themselves." Hana's smile brightened. "The weather is lovely year-round, and we have excellent recreational facilities. But your defenses," Veltar sputtered, "your weapons systems, your military installations." Hana looked even more confused. "Weapons? Oh my, no. We don't have any weapons here. Those large installations you probably saw on your approach scans are our terraforming equipment and weather control systems. We use them to maintain the colony's climate and help the local ecosystem flourish." She gestured towards some large, complex-looking structures visible in the distance. "That big facility over there manages our atmospheric processes. The one beyond it controls precipitation and wind patterns. Very useful for keeping our gardens healthy and making sure everyone stays comfortable." Before Veltar could respond, a new voice interrupted their conversation. "Did someone mention military stories?" An elderly human woman approached them slowly, using a walking stick for support. She looked to be in her late 70s or early 80s, with silver-white hair pulled back in a simple bun and bright, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Despite her age and the assistance of her walking stick, she moved with a certain dignity that suggested she had once commanded respect. "This is Admiral Yoon Jiwoo," Hana said warmly. She's 93 years old and has the most fascinating career history. Admiral, this is Ambassador Veltar from the Hegemonic Empire. He was asking about our military leadership. Admiral Yoon looked up at the towering reptilian diplomat with genuine interest, the same way she might examine an interesting historical artifact. Hegemonic Empire? That name sounds familiar. You remind me of the Karthak Dominion from my active duty days. Similar technological level, similar expansion philosophy. Lovely species once they grew out of the whole universal conquest phase. Veltar's eyes narrowed. You dare compare the mighty hegemonic empire to some forgotten civilization? Oh, not forgotten at all, Admiral Yoon said cheerfully. The Karthak are wonderful trading partners now. They make the most beautiful artwork, but that's beside the point. Would you like to see some of my old service records? I keep holographic documentation of my career, might give you some interesting historical perspective. She activated a small handheld device that projected a three-dimensional display into the air between them. The first image showed a younger version of Admiral Yoon standing on the bridge of a massive starship, but Veltar barely noticed her. His attention was completely captured by what surrounded the ship. The hologram showed space itself, seeming to bend and twist around creatures so vast they defied comprehension. Things with too many tentacles and eyes that burned with colors that shouldn't exist. The human fleet looked tiny against entities that seemed to be consuming entire star systems as casually as someone might eat an apple. Ah yes, the Void Hunters, Admiral Yoon said fondly, as if reminiscing about old friends. This was during the Outer Rim campaigns, maybe 60 years ago. Nasty creatures, those ones. They ate reality itself, turned whole sectors of space into cosmic soup. Took us 3 years to figure out how to fight them effectively. The hologram shifted to show human soldiers, some barely out of their teens, setting up equipment among the twisted wreckage of things that Veltar recognized from his species' most ancient and terrifying legends. Children playing games while sitting on the shells of entities that the hegemonic empire's mythology described as cosmic horrors beyond naming. The young ones adapted remarkably well, Admiral Yoon continued conversationally. Children are so resilient. They turned the whole cleanup operation into games and competitions. Here, look at this footage from the aftermath of the reality plague incident. The display changed again, showing human families having picnics in landscapes that hurt to look at directly, where the laws of physics seem to operate according to completely different rules. Parents pushed children on swings that existed, in 4 dimensions simultaneously, while in the background massive machines worked to repair holes in space-time itself. Veltar felt his legs growing weak. The hegemonic empire's most sacred texts spoke in whispers of the reality plague, describing it as the end of all existence, the ultimate destroyer that would one day consume all life in the galaxy. And these humans had treated its aftermath like a minor inconvenience requiring cleanup. Then there was the robot uprising of 2847, Admiral Yoon said, scrolling through her files. Now that was an interesting challenge. The artificial intelligences had gotten quite sophisticated, and they decided humanity was inefficient, built themselves bodies the size of moons, and started rearranging solar systems to improve their computational capacity. The hologram showed human children playing hide-and-seek among the deactivated remains of mechanical giants, each one large enough to serve as a small city. Parents supervised playgroups while standing on platforms that were clearly the heads of planet-sized robots. We managed to negotiate a peaceful resolution eventually, Admiral Yoon said with satisfaction. Turned out they just wanted better processing power and more interesting problems to solve. Now they help us with infrastructure projects and scientific research. Wonderful partners, really. Very logical and reliable. Veltar's vision was starting to blur at the edges. His empire's greatest strategic computers had calculated that meeting any one of these legendary threats would mean absolute extinction for their civilization. And this elderly human woman was describing them like minor, workplace disputes that had been resolved through reasonable discussion. The truth hit Veltar like being plunged into ice-cold water. His mind reeled as all the pieces suddenly fell into place with terrifying clarity. The humans weren't ignoring his ultimatum because they were stupid or brave or defiant. They weren't treating his threats like social invitations because they didn't understand the danger. They were being genuinely kind to what they saw as a less advanced species, making cute, harmless threats. The realization made his knees weak. His mighty hegemonic empire, with its planet-cracking weapons and 200 ship fleets, was like a child waving a wooden sword at a group of adults. The adults weren't afraid because there was nothing to be afraid of. They were just being patient and gentle with someone who didn't know any better. "Your defensive systems," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Where are they?" Tech specialist Han Ji-young looked up from her tablet with mild surprise. She was a woman in her early 40s with short black hair and the calm demeanor of someone who dealt with technical problems all day. She had been quietly monitoring various systems while standing near the edge of the crowd. "Oh, you mean the orbital defense grid?" she asked casually. "It's been tracking your fleet since the moment you entered our star system. Very polite formation flying, by the way. Your pilots show excellent discipline and spacing. Professional work." She turned her tablet around to show him the display. Veltar's eyes widened as he saw his entire invincible fleet mapped out in perfect detail. Every ship, every weapon, every energy signature was catalogued and analyzed in real time. "We've been passively scanning your vessels since arrival," Ji-young continued, in the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. "Your weapon systems are quite interesting from a historical perspective. The energy output is very stable and consistent for their technological generation." Veltar stared at the readings on her screen. His planet-cracking weapons, the devastating arsenal that had reduced 47 worlds to submission, were labeled on the human sensors as low-yield mining equipment. The classification was marked with a small note, "Suitable for asteroid processing and surface excavation." "Mining equipment?" he managed to croak. "Well, yes," Ji-young said, looking slightly confused by his reaction. "The energy signatures match our historical records of early terraforming tools. Very reliable design philosophy, though a bit outdated by current standards." She scrolled down through more technical data, pointing out various details with the enthusiasm of someone sharing an interesting hobby. "Our weather control system alone generates about 15 times the power output of your entire fleet. We use it to manage storm patterns and maintain optimal growing conditions for our gardens." The words felt like physical blows. His fleet's combined firepower was less than what these humans use to water their flowers. "Actually," Ji-young continued thoughtfully, "if your ships had tried to attack us, our atmospheric processors would have automatically redirected the energy back toward you. It's a safety feature to prevent accidental damage to the colony. Your weapons would have essentially turned your own fleet into scrap metal." Administrator Hana appeared beside them, having overheard the conversation. "Oh, I should mention that we do keep some old military equipment in storage," she said casually, as if discussing gardening tools. "From humanity's more, how should I put this, energetic period. Our museum curator, Song Hyejin, maintains a small historical exhibit if you're interested in seeing how we used to handle conflicts." Veltar found himself nodding numbly, following Hana across the colony grounds toward a modest, single-story building with large windows and flower boxes. It looked more like a library or community center than any kind of military installation. Museum curator Song Hyejin met them at the entrance. She was an elderly woman with gentle eyes and the patient manner of someone who spent her days sharing knowledge with visitors. She wore a simple cardigan and comfortable shoes, looking more like a grandmother than a keeper of weapons. "Welcome to our little history museum," she said warmly. "We don't get many visitors interested in the military exhibits, but they're quite educational. This way, please." She led them through several rooms filled with art, scientific instruments, and cultural artifacts from human civilization. Everything was displayed with careful respect and detailed explanations. Finally, they reached a smaller room in the back with a sign that read, "Humanity's Growth, Learning from Our Past." Behind protective glass cases sat devices that made Veltar's blood freeze in his veins. Weapons that looked deceptively simple, almost crude compared to his empire's elaborate technology. But the power readings displayed beside each exhibit made his vision blur. "This little device here," Hyejin said, pointing to something that looked like a simple metal cylinder, could destabilize the nuclear structure of an entire solar system. We developed it during what we call our difficult adolescent phase, when we thought problems should be solved through bigger explosions. She moved to the next case, with the same gentle tone she might use to describe flower arrangements. And this one could tear holes in space-time itself. Very effective for removing threats, but terribly messy. We learned that creating was much more satisfying than destroying. Veltar stared at weapons that could have erased his entire empire, his homeworld, his species, and every civilization within 100 light years. Each one was displayed like a shameful memory, a reminder of mistakes that had been learned from and left behind. "We like to remember how far we've come," Hyejin explained softly, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Growth is beautiful, don't you think? Learning to be better than we were yesterday. These weapons represent our past, but they're not who we are anymore." She looked at Veltar with the same kindness Admiral Yoon had shown earlier, the same patience Administrator Hana had demonstrated from the beginning. Every species goes through phases of development. The important thing is choosing to grow beyond them. Standing in that quiet museum, surrounded by casual displays of unimaginable destructive power, Veltar finally understood his true situation. He hadn't come to conquer a primitive species. He had arrived at the home of gods who were too kind to mention it. 6 months had passed since that first confusing day when Veltar had arrived with his fleet, expecting quick surrender and finding only kindness. Now he sat in the community center every Thursday afternoon, staring at a chessboard and trying to predict Admiral Yoon's next move. The weekly games had become the highlight of his extended stay on New Terra. The old admiral moved her knight, with practiced precision, placing it in a position that threatened multiple pieces at once. Her weathered hands moved with the same calm confidence she had probably shown commanding starships against cosmic horrors decades ago. "Your empire has such incredible potential," she said gently, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. "All that energy, all that drive and determination. Just imagine what your people could accomplish if you focused all that power on creation instead of conquest." Veltar studied the board, but his mind was only half on the game. Through the large windows of the community center, he could see the colony's main garden where something remarkable was happening. Young imperial citizens, their scales bright with health and curiosity, worked alongside human retirees in the flower beds and vegetable plots. The first cultural exchange students had arrived just last week, and the transformation was already visible. These young people had left the empire with the rigid military posture that every imperial citizen learned from childhood. Their scales had been held tight and formal, their movements precise and controlled. Now, just days later, they were laughing as they learned to plant seeds and tend growing things. One young imperial student, barely past adolescence, was being taught by elderly human gardener Kim Daiho how to properly water delicate seedlings. The student's natural curiosity was shining through as she asked question after question about soil composition and plant care. Her scales had relaxed into natural patterns, and her posture showed the easy confidence of someone discovering new passions. "Look at them," Admiral Yoon said, following Veltar's gaze toward the garden. "Your young people are natural learners. Give them something constructive to focus on, and they flourish like flowers in good soil." In another part of the garden, a small group of imperial students sat in a circle with retired human philosopher Li Jinwu, discussing concepts of ethics and beauty. Their voices carried excitement as they explored ideas that had been forbidden or ignored in their militaristic society. For the first time in their lives, they were encouraged to think about creating beauty rather than efficient destruction. The changes weren't limited to the students. Back on the imperial homeworld, Veltar's regular reports had sparked unprecedented interest in peaceful contact with other species. The Empire's ruling council, intrigued by descriptions of human technology and philosophy, had officially designated New Terra as the Empire's first cultural embassy. In Administrator Hana's office, the original Ultimatum scroll hung in a simple wooden frame on the wall behind her desk. A small plaque beneath it read, First, diplomatic contact with the hegemonic empire. Visiting imperial dignitaries often stopped to examine it, but not for the reasons Veltar had originally intended. Instead of seeing it as a symbol of imperial might, they studied it as an example of ineffective communication. Several had requested copies to take back home, not as templates for threats, but as examples of how not to approach peaceful species. The Ultimatum had become a teaching tool about the importance of understanding other cultures before making contact. "Your move," Admiral Yoon said gently, bringing Veltar's attention back to the chessboard. He studied the pieces, trying to find a way out of the tactical trap she had created. Every move he considered seemed to lead to greater disadvantage. Finally, he moved his king to what he hoped was a safer square. "Check," Admiral Yoon said quietly, moving her queen into position. Veltar looked at the board and realized his position was hopeless. But instead of the frustration he might have felt months ago, he found himself smiling. It was an expression his species had almost forgotten during their centuries of constant warfare, but it came naturally now. "So you're teaching me more than chess, aren't you?" he said, looking up at the wise old woman across from him. Admiral Yoon's eyes twinkled with gentle humor. "The best games always do. Chess teaches patience, planning, and the importance of seeing beyond your immediate circumstances. But mostly it teaches us that there's always something new to learn." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze moving to the windows where young Imperial and human citizens worked together in the afternoon sunlight. Every species goes through phases of development. The hegemonic empire is simply ready to move into its next phase. Growth is never easy, but it's always possible. Outside in the gardens, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the colony. Human children played alongside their new imperial friends, their games a mixture of both species' traditions. They raced through the flower beds, careful not to damage the plants, and climbed the specially designed playground equipment that accommodated both human and imperial physiology. One group had invented a new game that combined imperial strategic thinking with human creativity. They used colorful stones and flowers to create elaborate patterns on the ground, competing to see who could design the most beautiful and complex arrangements. The competition was fierce but friendly, with winners offering tips to help others improve their designs. Veltar watched a young imperial child teaching a human boy how to arrange scales in decorative patterns, while the human child showed his friend how to braid flower stems into intricate shapes. Neither species had known such cooperation was possible just months ago. "Checkmate," Admiral Yoon said softly. Veltar looked down at the board and nodded in acceptance. "Another excellent game, Admiral. Thank you for your patience with a slow learner." "Patience is easy when the student is genuinely trying to improve," she replied, beginning to reset the pieces for their next game. "Same time next week?" "I wouldn't miss it," Veltar said, meaning every word. As the sun began to set over New Terra, casting golden light across the peaceful colony, the sound of children's laughter continued to fill the air. It was a sound that had replaced the roar of warship engines, and Veltar found it infinitely more beautiful.